If you donate to a political candidate, the FEC will record your full name and address, who you're donating to, how much you're donating, and your occupation. That data is publicly available, which means we can use the data from 2023 to create a political alignment for different occupations. Here's a graph showing the 100 most frequent occupations broken out by which political party they're donating to. The two most frequent occupations are retired, which is about 2-to-1 Republican, and not employed, which is hundreds to 1 Democratic. When I first saw this, my thought was, Democrats don't have jobs. But the difference was so extreme that I felt I had to dig a little bit deeper and look more into it. Searching online, I found this explanation, which is when you donate through Act Blue, the Democrats' largest super PAC, you're asked the question, are you currently employed? And if you say no, then Act Blue is going to fill out your occupation as not employed. And that explains why so many Democratic donors have the occupation not employed. It's probably a lot of the retired Democratic donors being marked as not employed through the automatic Act Blue thing. Also, you might imagine if you were a dentist but not working right now, and someone asked you, what's your occupation? You might say dentist. But if someone asked you, are you currently working? You might say no. So that's probably another source for not employed people donating to Democrats. In this figure, we're looking at the 100 most frequent jobs as a ratio of Republicans to Democrats. And there's a dashed line at 1. So any bar that's longer than this dashed line has more Republicans than Democrats, and shorter means they have more Democrats than Republicans. So you can see something like truck driver is a very Republican job, or self-dash employed is extremely Republican. Self-space employed, not as Republican. That's interesting. I'm not sure what that means. Rancher is a very Republican job. It looks like farmer is a very Republican job. There are about 4 Republican farmers for every Democratic farmer donating. Here's a similar plot, again for the top 100 most frequent jobs, but this time we're just looking at Democratic to Republican ratio. And one thing to notice is that these are much more extreme. That is, there are a lot of jobs which are extremely Democratic to Republican. So writer, for example, is nearly 15 to 1 Democratic writers compared to Republican writers. Social worker is over 20 to 1. Psychotherapist is over 20 to 1. The video that inspired me to make this post was looking at pairs of occupations which had some conceptual similarity but were very different between Republican and Democrat. And we can reproduce some of those results with this data set. One of the ideas I had was that professions which are more typically female tend to skew more Democratic. So nurse, for example, has a greater share of Democratic donors than doctor does. Doctor is kind of evenly split, and nurse is skewed towards Democratic donors. Flight attendant and pilot are another example. Flight attendant, I think, is more female-coded, and it has a greater share of Democratic donors. Pilot is more male, and it has a greater share of Republican donors. One comparison that I thought was interesting is mom and homemaker. People who list their occupation as mom are much more likely to donate Democratic. People who list their occupation as homemaker are much more likely to donate Republican. I also suspect that age has something to do with it, so I tried to think of an occupation that was dominated by young people. I used streamer, and an occupation that's dominated by old people. I used congressman. And here, 100% of people who listed their occupation as streamer donated to the Democratic Party. I checked, there were only 13 such donations, so it's not a huge category. I'm guessing if we compare congressman to congresswoman, I haven't done this yet, but I would guess that the congresswomen are more Democratic, and indeed that is true. Finally, I took all the jobs that had a ratio of 1.5 or greater, Republican to Democrat, and Democrat to Republican. And I put those into 2 groups, Group 1 jobs, Group 2 jobs, where Group 1 is Republican, Group 2 is Democratic-leaning jobs. And I gave the 2 groups without the label to ChatGPT. I asked it, how would you categorize or compare and contrast these 2 groups? ChatGPT said that the Republican jobs tended to be more physical, more direct involvement with customers, less education required, more entrepreneurial or self-directed. These were jobs that emphasized practical skills and less education. These were more male-dominated jobs, more rural-dominated jobs, and ChatGPT recognized that these were traditionally conservative jobs. By contrast, for Group 2, ChatGPT pointed out these were more intellectual, abstract, highly educated pursuits that tended to have less variability in income, higher incomes with less variability. Also, that these were more urban and progressive jobs and more egalitarian careers, which I think is fair and pretty accurate. And I think this FEC data is an interesting source of data, especially because we have one of these files every year, so we could compare how occupations changed over time. If you have ideas for other comparisons that might be done with this data set, I'd love to hear them. Thanks for your time.